me ask you this, Doctor. Did you, were you able to determine the number of wounds that Miss Avery sustained?
Yes.
And what was the overall number?
As far as sharp force injuries, there were 28, I believe.
All right. And in your report, I think it makes sense to hear, you kind of discussed them in groups, is that right?
Correct.
All right. So the first injuries you noted were sharp force injuries to the head and neck, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I'm now showing exhibit number 69. I think you have a monitor there, Doctor. Can you tell me what's depicted in exhibit 69?
Yes, these are the wounds that I had described in the report on the right side of the Miss Avery's face and neck.
All right. And the indications, the letters that are also apparent, did you put those there?
I did.
And why is that?
To basically catalog each of the individual wounds.
Okay. And when you say a sharp force injury, what do you mean by that specifically?
So injuries are generally classified into two categories, blunt and sharp. And a blunt force injury is an injury not caused by something sharp. So sharp would include incisional type wounds, stab wounds, anything basically caused by a sharp object. And
were you able to measure the depth of these wounds?
I was.
Could you, I don't know, so let's start with A. Could you tell us the depth of injury A?
A was about 1/4 of an inch deep.
How about injury B?
3/8 of an inch deep.
How about C?
3/8 of an inch deep.
Injury D?
3/8 of an inch.
Injury E?
5/8 of an inch.
Injury F?
1 inch.
Okay. How about G?
G is a superficial wound, so it was not very deep.
Okay. And what about H?
Same thing, also a superficial wound, not very deep.
Okay. I'm going to show you number 7 now. These depict other portions of injury, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what letter do we have here?
That is a J.
All right. And describe injury J, if you can.
J is it's a sharp force injury that involves the corner of the right side of the mouth and damage to the internal structures of the mouth as well.
And this is exhibit 71. Let me make sure I have it pointed correctly. What is this injury here?
That is, I believe, that is wound H. It's either H or I. I can't tell with that.
Let me go back to, this is 69 again. And there's one here and one kind of under here. I guess
Okay.
they could both be an H or an I.
Correct. So the one on the neck next to G is H, and the
Okay.
one on the chin is I.
All right, so now let's go to that. This is I. Then, right?
So that is I, correct.
Okay. And what can you tell from that injury?
So that is also a sharp force injury, basically in the sort of the skin folds underneath Miss Avery's chin, and it was about 1/2 an inch deep.
Did you make any subsidiary findings regarding these wounds?
Yes.
What were those?
So there was damage to the soft tissue, including skin, fat, muscle in the neck and the face. More specifically, in the cluster of the wounds on the right side of the neck, there was damage to the muscle underneath the sternocleidomastoid muscle, as well as damage to the external jugular vein.
Okay, and one more time, this is 69. Can you tell which of those affected the jugular vein, or are you just talking about one of them?
So there are two possibilities. Wound E and wound F both have sufficient depth, and they're in the proximate area. So it would most likely be either of those that caused that deeper damage.
And could you describe for us what is the jugular?
Sure. So there are several vessels going into the brain and coming out of the brain. The carotid arteries going in and the jugular veins, both the internal and external jugulars are the vessels that the blood leaves the head through, and the right external jugular vein in this case was the one that was injured.
Okay. Could any of those injuries in and of themselves been potentially fatal?
Yes.
And can you narrow that down, or just potentially any of those?
The two that were closest in proximity to the external jugular vein, the E and the F, are likely the ones that would have been more fatal.
Okay. Now I'm going to move on to injuries of the torso.
Sure.
Is that the next category that you discussed in your findings?
It is.
All right, so now this is 72. All right, so this is Exhibit 72. It's a little bit hard to see from the glare, but what injuries are depicted in this image?
So there are multiple injuries here. The two top ones, L and M, are to the chest area, and N through Q are to the abdomen.
Okay. Did you make any findings about injury M?
Yes.
What can you tell us about injury M?
N is what I would call a stab wound. It's about 1/4 of an inch deep. It doesn't necessarily penetrate into the body cavities. It's more superficial.
Going to display 73, please, for you, doctor. And just orient yourself to that. What injury are we looking at here?
That's injury N.
Okay, and it seems common sense, but is this ruler just to help you understand dimensions?
Yes.
And what can you tell me about injury N?
So injury N also would be a stab wound, and there's a bit of what I call a tail. So if you're looking at the screen, that side or my right side, there's a little bit of what's a superficial incisional type wound. This wound is deep enough that it actually penetrates into the abdominal cavity, and actually the wound track goes into some of the organs within the cavity.
And were you able to determine which organs it may have affected?
I was.
What were those?
The left lobe of the liver, the pancreas, the small intestine, the junction of the aorta and the artery feeding the kidney, one of the kidneys, and it also hit part of the left kidney as well.
In your opinion, is that wound in and of itself potentially fatal?
Yes.
Displaying for you further torso pictures, this is Exhibit 75. Can you see that, doctor?
I can.
And are there injuries you noted in this picture, 75?
Yes.
And where are we looking here on the body?
So Miss Avery is lying in the prone position, which means on her stomach. So where you see Y, that would actually be her right shoulder. So the injuries that you're seeing labeled further down on the back are on the right side.
Okay. And that'd be Z, AA, and AB?
Correct.
This is Exhibit 76, showing why. Did you make any determinations about injury Y?
Yes, injury Y is also a stab wound, but it is relatively superficial and it does not penetrate into the chest cavity.
And back to 75, what about these other injuries, Z, AA, and AB? Did you make determinations regarding those injuries?
I did.
What were those?
These also stab wounds, relatively superficial, only going into the soft tissue of the back, not into the cavity.
Did you examine Miss Avery's extremities, meaning arms?
I did.
Did she have injuries on her extremities?
She did on the upper extremities.
All right. I'm showing you Exhibit 79. Can you see what's depicted in that?
Yes.
All right. And all right. What letters are denoted in this particular image?
I am seeing R, S, T, U, and V.
Okay. And did you make subsidiary findings or conclusions about any of those injuries?
Yes, these are also stab wounds. S is probably a combination of a stab and an incisional wound because of the superficial nature of it. I determined that they all go into the soft tissue and they all have varying depths.
Okay. Were we able to determine the depths of some of these injuries?
Yes.
And how about R?
R, about a ½ an inch in depth.
What about injury S?
So S, it looks deep, but it really only penetrates into the fat and the skin.
And what about T, U, and V?
T is superficial, again, only into the skin and soft tissue, as are both U and V.